Is the world dying? Is our culture dying? Is this mess one that we have created ourselves? Is this something that is unique to the United States? Is it planet-wide? What's going on here? Chris Hedges, Pulitzer Prize winner, his new book, Empire of Illusion, The End of Literacy and the Triumph of Spectacle. And for our listeners in Portland listening on AM 620 KPOJ, Chris is going to be at Powell's tonight on Burnside, the legendary bookstore, at 7:30 tonight. And should be a lot of fun, but he's in the studio with us live here today. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Thom.
So great to have you here. In synopsis, you paint a rather dire portrait of a bread and circus America.
Yeah, it's the story of an America that has transferred its allegiance to spectacle, to pseudo-events that no longer can determine what is real and what is illusion, that confuses how they're made to feel with knowledge, that confuses propaganda with ideology, and that's exceedingly dangerous. All totalitarian societies are image-based societies, and that's what our society has become.
Already. We're past the point of saying we're at a threshold. You're saying we've passed the threshold.
I think that you can easily, there's enough indicators within the culture to illustrate that print-based culture, those people who deal in nuance and ambiguity and ideas, are a minority.
But can't there be a nuanced and thoughtful electronic? I mean, I read you all the time on the internet. I mean, it's you've got a piece up today on commondreams.org.
Sure, but the fact is,
as do I, by the way.
Right, but the fact is, shows like yours in the cultural mainstream are
the anomalies. We're the exception that proves the rule.
You're not interrupting me. You're not insulting me. You're not shouting. It's not carnival barking. You use the airwaves to actually try and discuss ideas and allow your guests to flesh out opinions that you may not even agree with. That's very different from almost everything we see. And look, newspapers are dying. The publishing industry is dying. You have 42 million Americans who are illiterate. You have another 50 million Americans who are semi-literate, meaning they read at a 4th or 5th grade level. And then you have people who are functionally literate, but they don't read.
Yeah.
And there are tremendous consequences for that because, as you well know, having worked in the advertising industry, these images are not benign. They are skillfully orchestrated and manipulated by for-profit corporations to get us to do a lot of things that are not in our interest. And, of course, this all ties into the rise of celebrity culture, well on display with our 3-week coverage of the death of Michael Jackson.
Right, yeah, the whole circus around him. So how do we fix this? How do we recover some sense? I mean, you read de Tocqueville, de Tocqueville's story of what is it? Democracy in America is the title, 1838. And he only spent 6 months here. I mean, he was in his late 30s, French nobleman, came over, looked around, blew his mind.
Yeah.
The average farmer was as literate as the average scholar.
That's the tragedy, isn't it?
Yeah. And I would submit to you that while we could go back to the founding of the modern PR industry and Woodrow Wilson and all that kind of stuff in the 19 teens, that the idea of corporate personhood has played a big role in this. The rise of corporate dominance and the theft of human rights, essentially, has played a role in this, and that it really began going downhill fast when the Reagan administration came to power, and particularly when they decided that they were going to change our schools.
Yeah. Although I think that, it's been decades in the making.
Yeah.
And I think that we have seen profound cultural transformation in American culture, or cultures, because we once had distinct regional and ethnic cultures. These were all systematically destroyed in the early part of the 20th century by corporate interests who used mass communications as well as an understanding of human psychology to turn consumption into an inner compulsion. And with that, we lost the old values of thrift, of regional identity that had its own iconography, aesthetic expression, and history, as well as diverse immigrant
But, Chris, there
traditions.
I guarantee you there's somebody listening right now going, that's like the old folks going, these young kids these days, they don't understand, that kind of thing. And is it possible that there is some redeeming value in this new culture that has been created out of corporatocracy and what I would argue is a form of fascism, basically an external control of our government? Or is it something that we just need to pull down and start over? And if so, how?
Well, Sheldon Wolin, the great political philosopher who taught at Berkeley and later Princeton, now 86, has written his sort of magnum opus called Democracy Incorporated, and he argues that we live in a system that he calls inverted totalitarianism, that in classical totalitarianism like fascism or communism, economics is always subordinate to politics. But in inverted totalitarianism, politics is subordinate to economics. And with the rise of the consumer society, with the commodification of everything, including human beings, the natural resources, you have built into it an inevitable form of self-annihilation. Because when nothing has intrinsic value, when societies no longer recognize the sacred, you exhaust everything for its ability to make money, no matter how much human misery you create, no matter how far you go to destroy the ecosystem that is sustaining the human species. And that with the rise of celebrity culture, of consumer culture, and unfettered capitalism, right, you get what Benjamin DeMott has called, I think quite correctly, junk politics.
Yeah, and we have a junk politics, junk culture, and I think perhaps the most important point you just made is, and we just talked about for the last hour, is this loss of a sense of the sacred. And it's interesting. I think some months ago I had you on, and I was taking the atheist position, and we were having this debate because in the previous hour I had an atheist on, and I had taken the religious position and had a debate. My reality is a little bit of both, and between heart and mind, I guess, and to use Jefferson's old letter to his girlfriend in France. It seems to me that we're wired for the sacred, and that there is still within the zeitgeist of America, or within the soul of America, there is still this belief that, for example, the Constitution is something that is sacred, that the founding ideals of the Enlightenment are sacred, and I'm using that word in its broadest sense. A secular religion of America, as it were. That some people call it American exceptionalism and ridicule it. But I think that in that, setting aside the two major parties, in citizen movements, we can perhaps recapture those original dreams. Am I just being hopelessly optimistic?
No, understanding the sacred is absolutely key. And although I don't like the new atheists, I must just throw in that almost any Orthodox believer would consider me an atheist and lead the London Review of Books. When they reviewed I Don't Believe in Atheists began by saying I was a non-believer. Right. But what does tie me to, and to you, is that utter importance of the sacred. And Karl Polanyi, this great economist in 1944, wrote a book called The Great Transformation, in which he said that a society that no longer recognizes the sacred, that exhausts everything for profit, always kills itself. And I think that's what we're seeing. Oh, and as an economist, he actually used the word sacred. Right. That human beings have an intrinsic worth, that the natural world has an intrinsic worth beyond its potential to generate profit.
And this has nothing to do with religion.
No.
That's why I said this is resacralizing America.
Right.
And thus, perhaps to the extent that we're an example of the world, perhaps saving the world. I mean, these are big words.
We live in a corporate state. We live in a state that no longer responds to the interests of its citizens, but does the bidding of corporations. There's no shortage of examples of that, from the largest transference of wealth upwards in American history to the so-called healthcare debate, where for-profit healthcare industries are literally profiting off of death. Any debate about healthcare must begin from the factual understanding that the for-profit healthcare industry is the problem. Then we can debate what we do. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, and many, many citizens know that across but we can't have it because we are completely controlled. We've undergone a kind of coup d'etat in slow motion. We live in a kind of inverted totalitarianism where the facade of democracy and the Constitution are held up as an ideal, but the actual levers of power are driven by very destructive forces.
And we need to take them on. Chris Hedges, Empire of Illusion, The End of Literacy and the Triumph of Spectacle. And for our listeners in Portland, he'll be tonight at Powell's on Burnside, 7:30. Empire of Illusion, brilliant book. Chris, thank you.